Hey, our group, we are presenting the cross-cultural negotiations between the American and Japanese firms. I am Monish, and my teammates are Zonghao Li, Yeswanth Narayanan, and Yixuan Zhan. So I'm going to start off the presentation by talking about the negotiation process in Japanese firms. So first up, I'm going to talk about the negotiation adaptability of Japanese firms. The Japanese are found to be very stern and very strict with their measures and with their knowledge and with their tactics. But given that if any situation needs any adaptation or any change, they can change to adapt, or they can change to visualize the situation at hand if required only. They are known to be rigid and are very intra-communicative, which means their communication levels are high amongst themselves. That is, they have a very high synergy amongst their own team members, their own hierarchical superiors, but it does not reflect on the other party or the other firm, that is the American firm here in this case. And they are very clear cut with their goals and expectations. They are organized, they are structured, and they do not wish to attain any side goals or any goals without any pre-prepared planning or setting, or without any permission from their hierarchical superiors. Talking about the negotiation language, the Japanese are known to be very strong, and they're very clear cut, and they, as mentioned before, they show signs of very stern body language, which they do not budge or which they do not make amends. They have firm beliefs, and their negotiation tactics are very stern and very strict, and their final decisions are received with approval from their hierarchical superiors only. The information is always indirect and is usually the negotiation behavior. The behavior around the firm is usually dispersed within teams or within the hierarchical management, and the final statements, however, are made with clarity and are presented to the team. So the Japanese negotiation standards, they don't believe in other procedural negotiating statements, but rather are pre-informed and are predominantly adamant to change any agreements if met. Influence and power is very visible and are shown to enforce negotiating statements. That is because the Japanese believe in hierarchy, and since they believe in hierarchy, the influence and the power they show is very visible, and there's also an intimidating tactic to enforce their statement. And the standards which the Japanese set are at a very high standard, as the Japanese believe in clear long-term success and constant hard work to attain those goals rather than short-term side goals or short-term business goals. Next, Jan will be talking about the negotiation strategy.
Japan's approach to negotiations can be compared to other nations. Next slide, we will analyze how their bargaining tactics affect Japanese multinational companies. We note that Japanese culture can affect negotiations at international markets. The Japanese hierarchy also affect how they do negotiation, while some countries such as U.S. value relationships, Japan does not, because Americans value power sharing, formal structure are less important, and nor ranking explorer can step aside if it spends up or improve the job. The Japanese value long-term relationship, which may conflict with other firms. Correct. Third, Japanese has social feature that makes it and country language. Japanese lacks English self-control, making indirect that avoid confrontations that could turn violent. Many Japanese dealers avoid embarrassing themselves, their companies, or their customers. Japanese companies are risk averse that fear a this-term conclusion will rather cost them the negotiation of spark hostility. Lastly, Japanese decision-making are slow due to a lack of familiarity with decision-making methods. Many misunderstandings between Japanese and Western occur. Next slide. Yes. Following an introduction to the different Japanese negotiation methods, this section will examine how their strategy influence Japanese multinational companies. Based on our finding, we skeptic that the power dynamic between Ost-Root negotiators and their Western may be tense. Will Japanese multinational companies seek to assert its domestic in negotiations with a partner who places a higher importance on a more level playing field? Tension may arise. In addition, it may be difficult to make long-term stage growth when dealing with local expansion of revenue, such as in the U.S. There will be a discount because local of contract involved with the short term, while Japanese management will practice the long time. Third, especially when dealing with farmers from the West, the line in the negotiation process and decision-making might be perceived as an attempt to negotiate because of time and effort required to go through the negotiations, as well as the possibility that the parties involved may not have a shared framework for the words being used. There is a risk of miscommunication. In conclude, in the American view that an agreement is a deal and should be treated as such, the Japanese tend to see a deal as only an intention without a formal work of the long-term relationship, with the relationship taking priority over the terms of the arrangement. The Japanese also allow room for behind-the-scenes negotiations since they cannot explain matter at the negotiating table. Western are used to having all the cards on the table and want discussions to be clear. Use the Japanese approach to this holistic. Last but not least, there is a risk of missing out a change size. Japanese are worried or working with a person that perceived to be alone or disagree. For more national companies, this change many forgot review. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhan. Negotiation process in American firms. Negotiations are result-oriented in American firms. And when I say that, Americans in their culture believe in getting things done and getting them done quickly and effectively. This approach usually trumps over building relationships because there is always an agenda involved, and they believe in achieving milestones and targets as opposed to building and establishing relationships. Trust is placed in high regard, but in the pretense of achieving milestones and targets, and not in general relationships when compared to the Japanese culture. Next slide. Negotiations are direct and transparent. Americans believe in speaking what they feel and think. And when I say that, they place high value on being direct and speaking the truth during negotiations. This is to establish what both the stakeholders want to achieve and set the communication right at the beginning and during the negotiation process. However, when compared to the Japanese negotiation process, this is perceived as rude and aggressive. However, in the American culture, being loud and speaking over others is perceived as passion or commitment. American negotiation is usually verbal and lacks actions and signs as opposed to the Japanese culture. Being clear and forthcoming is extremely important during American negotiations, as they perhaps don't have the quality of reading between the lines as the Japanese do. Next point. Negotiations can be usually back and forth. And when I say negotiations with American firms may usually seem like a game of ping pong, because they have a list of questions that they run through the table and receive opinions and perceptions from people around the table. The negotiation culture is agenda bound, like I mentioned, so establishing that is extremely important. And the Japanese culture or any other culture who sit for negotiations with American firms must know that. And since there is an agenda involved and Americans like to get things done quickly, negotiations are usually fast-paced, and other counterparts must keep up to that pace to establish and reach a proper negotiation. Next slide. Negotiations are never personal. Americans always draw a line between personal and professional relationships, and they bring the same culture to negotiations as well. And most negotiations, or all negotiations in the American culture, are prescriptive and not descriptive. Like I mentioned before, they like getting things done quickly, and that's one of the reasons why they're prescriptive. Truth is always placed on the contract as opposed to relationship and relationship building. Everything is agenda driven. Truth is only in the context of the contract or getting the work done, and not related to relationship or relationship building. Stakeholders or negotiators on the other side of the table must always keep in mind these aspects of American negotiation cultures when they sit down with American firms, as it may be completely different. In this case, Japanese culture, it may be completely different to what they're used to, or what they've been raised to, or what they've been doing at their firms. Over to my next team member.
Okay, thanks, Yesh. So now let me talk about negotiation strategies adopted by American firms in general. I have identified several important aspects of American negotiation strategies or approaches developed over time by American companies. For ultimate goal, American firms value short-term profitability, often with personal benefits for negotiators. Unlike the Japanese firms, they value long-term profitability and group interests. For ideal negotiating climate, straightforward and impersonal style would be preferred by American firms. They do not like to establish a personal relationship with another party in a negotiation process. For risk orientation, American firms are risk-oriented, which means they are willing to take more risks to achieve a better deal for them. For communication style, the US is in a low-context culture, which means individuals must express themselves as explicitly as possible for effective communication to occur. They tend to be direct and blunt. For emotional sensitivity, it is avoided. Negotiators often avoid close relationship personal relationship. Next slide, please. For basis of decision making, decisions usually made on a cost-benefit basis for the short-term run. For the importance of face saving, it is not very important for American firms. Embarrassing the another party may bring an advantage in negotiation process for them. Actually, in fact, for disputes resolution, American firms prefer contract language and litigation over conciliation for disputes resolution. For conflict, American firms sometimes might start some passionate arguments back and forth when there are different opinions and ideas. Next slide, please. Then, please let me analyze some possible impacts of American negotiation strategies on decision making. The U.S. makes a deal as the most important goal for any negotiation. There is a clear hierarchy or organizational structure in the U.S. team. The boss often have more authority for decision making. U.S. negotiators are willing to take more risks for getting the best deal possible by following bottom line approach. Both U.S. negotiation approaches, win-win approach or win-lose approach, have to lead to a definitive contract to which both parties are expected to follow. In the eyes of American negotiators, a deal is a final deal, which should not be negotiable in a short term or even a long term. Otherwise, it would be frustrating for Americans since time is of the essence. Thanks. U.S. negotiators concerned with facts, figures, and specific information, which allow them to pursue negotiating goals. They need to get enough information of the another party's concerns and interests to establish or modify their goals. They are always ready to share information if needed. For negotiation final outcomes, U.S. negotiators prefer a detailed and science contract, including implementation and legal aspects, as the best conclusion to a negotiation. Now, next, let's move on to the recommendation or possible suggestions for Japanese and American firms in different stages of the negotiation process by using problem-solving negotiation strategy. Here we have come up with a few simple suggestions for dealing with cultural differences in international business negotiation. Firstly, be mindful of each other's cultural differences and practice and adjust accordingly. So show respect for cultural differences. It helps to reduce negative stereotypes and personal biases about different groups. Secondly, preparation beforehand to acclimatize with each other's cultural background. So do not forget and spend more time to learn about the another party's culture. Through reading or talking with those who know the country concerned, you can certainly learn a lot about their culture. So finally, perception and ideas should be drafted with respect to each other's cultural differences and to reduce the gap. Every possible solution must be verified with both parties to move forward. So be aware of how others might perceive our culture, so we can better understand others' reactions and responses while negotiating with them. So constantly searching the ways to bridge the cultural gap, so we can make the communication more smoothly and clearly. Thanks. Next, please.
Yep. So now I'm going to wrap up the presentation by advising the negotiation process or giving problem-solving negotiation strategies in various stages of the negotiation process. So the first stage is preparation. It's very simple. American firms and Japanese firms need to realize their differences and to understand the differences and prepare themselves for any scenario possible, be it best case scenario or worst case scenario. The second stage of negotiation is relationship building. This can only be done by proper communication and even the inclusion of body language. And it should be modified on both the sides, that is the American side and the Japanese side. However, this is in line with respecting both the customs and practices. The third stage negotiation is information exchange and first offer. This can be done by persuasion, which is a strong format of verbal communication, and a little bit of physical communication is needed to understand the mutual benefits and make an offer in line with the goals and expectations. The fourth stage in negotiation is persuasion. So this can be done by setting practical goals and creative solutions, and to think about creative solutions on both sides, depending on the scenario or the stage of the negotiation. And this should be enacted based on the interest of both the parties and firms. So a concrete discussion, a concrete solution, a concrete plan is needed to set. It needed to be set with both the parties and firms. The fifth stage is concessions. So concession usually happens when a negotiation is not 100% or is not completely satisfactory. So some concessions can be made, and this can be done by mutual understanding or mutual discussion, and to talk about the practical application, that is the positive and negative application, and this should be implied to avail best concessions by both the parties. And the last stage being agreement. This is the most happiest stage, or the most concluding stage, and is also the final stage of the negotiation process. After the agreement, Japanese and American firms need to come to a common ground or a middle ground, so that both can avail the best benefits and the best interests, and both the interests of the firms, that is the American and Japanese firms, are met satisfactorily as well. Thank you for your time, and then thank you for the team.